Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are wrestling with a question that it really sits at the very foundation of human civilization. Why are we here? And maybe more importantly, why did we get smart so fast?
It's a great question because when you actually plot the timeline of human development, the anomaly is just glaring.
It is.
For millions and millions of years, our hominid ancestors were, well, by our standards, they were intellectually stagnant. They were bipedal, they chipped stones, and that was about it. That was the limit of their technical ambition for an eternity.
Exactly. I mean, it took something like 7 million years for a chimpanzee-like ancestor just to stand upright. 7 million. And then another million years just to figure out how to strike two rocks together to make a crude tool.
The progress was glacial. You have to measure it in geological epochs, not human lifetimes.
Right. But then, in what is basically the blink of an eye, just 30,000 years,
Yeah.
we go from stacking stones at a huge site like Göbekli Tepe to landing exploratory probes on other planets. That jump isn't just evolution.
No.
It feels like someone just flipped a turbo switch.
Uh-huh. And the standard Darwinian model, it really struggles to account for that impossible speed. It struggles mightily. And that intellectual struggle is why we have to turn to the oldest text humanity has.
Because they have an answer.
They offer a consistent, if, completely radical explanation. Humanity wasn't merely evolved, we were engineered. Purpose-built by a far superior race of beings descending from the heavens.
Known in the Sumerian texts as the Anunnaki.
Exactly.
And that is the narrative we're diving into today. Our mission is to analyze this grand, sprawling tale. We're going to be pulling together threads from the original Sumerian tablets, ancient Egyptian records, biblical accounts, even Native American oral traditions.
And we'll be putting them alongside modern scientific findings. Things from our own genetics, from cosmology.
Yeah.
We're asking how much of this origin story with its sky gods and its gold mines and its world-wiping flood can we actually verify, or at least, corroborate with current data?
So let's set the stage one more time with that early timeline. 7 million years ago, early hominids start walking. Then you fast forward almost all the way to 300,000 years ago.
And that's when anatomically modern Homo sapiens finally appear. But even after we show up, technological progress just stalls. It's flat. It takes hundreds of thousands of years for a simple stone spearhead to morph into a slightly better one.
And then boom, right around the time the Neanderthals went extinct, that technological engine just roars to life.
And that rapid, inexplicable switch, that's where our deep dive begins.
So the first place that switch seems to have been thrown is in Mesopotamia. This takes us directly to what you could call the Great Sumerian Paradox.
Indeed. Sumer, located in that fertile land between two rivers, Mesopotamia. It's the first true high civilization.
And it predates everything we think of as ancient.
It developed these revolutionary, sophisticated systems long before Egypt started building its famous pyramids or the Britons raised Stonehenge. And while we know sites like Göbekli Tepe are older, you have to understand Sumer was the world's first vast urban empire. It wasn't just a monumental ritual center.
The level of societal and technological sophistication they achieved, and seemingly out of nowhere, is just astounding. They didn't just exist. They created the foundations of modern life.
Right.
We owe them for the invention of writing, which allows for complex record keeping, the invention of the wheel, which completely revolutionizes transport, the sailboat, the plow, and these vast, sophisticated irrigation systems that let their crops flourish in a really challenging landscape.
And they pioneered the concept of the city-state, these independently governed communities that coexisted under a shared cultural framework. And they didn't just stop there. They established the world's first legal system.
The Code of Aramo.
The Code of Aramo. And this wasn't some slow, organic development over millennia. It was an explosive burst of ingenuity that changed the entire planet's trajectory almost overnight.
And their abstract knowledge base was even more shocking. They had complex knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. I mean, they didn't just count. They developed the sexagesimal system, a base 60 numbering system. Why is that so important?
It's important because we still use it every single day. The Sumerians' base 60 system is the reason we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle.
Wow.
This system, which they developed 7,000 years ago, was perfectly suited for complex astronomical calculations. It allowed them to track and predict celestial movements with remarkable accuracy. That's a feat that would be impossible with the simpler base 10 systems that many of their contemporaries were using.
So their understanding of the cosmos was it was too refined for society supposedly just emerging from the Stone Age.
Way too refined.
Okay, so here's the paradox we have to confront. If Homo sapiens had been on Earth for 300,000 years, why did it take 225,000 years of stalled technology before Sumerian civilization suddenly ignited?
Right.
And once that engine started, it only took us 7,000 years from inventing Sumerian writing to landing a human-made object on the moon. What was humanity doing during those 200 millennia of utter technological stagnation?
Well, the ancient texts, which are the source material for this whole theory, they're very explicit about that. They claim that technology couldn't advance because humans weren't progressing. They were busy working.
They were slaves.
They were slaves, tasked specifically with mining gold for their celestial masters.
And that pivots our discussion to the other big paradox here, the paradox of gold. Today, we get its utility, but the source material really emphasizes the truly, well, miraculous nature of gold in the modern era. It suggests the Anunnaki knew something about this element that we only rediscovered in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Gold is exceptional. It's an unparalleled conductor, which makes it crucial for microelectronics, for space travel, data processing. It's vital in our computers, our mobile devices.
Right, it's everywhere.
But beyond conduction, its use in medicine is critical. Radioactive gold isotopes are used today to target and destroy cancer cells with incredible precision. But for the Anunnaki, it was the microscopic properties that mattered the most.
Tell us more about that environmental utility, because that seems to be the key to understanding why the Anunnaki were so desperate.
Okay, so the source explains that gold nanoparticles, these are microscopic fragments of the metal, they can act as chemical catalysts. They facilitate reactions that purify water and critically clean the air by leaching out toxic compounds.
So this is real-world geoengineering.
It's a real-world, cutting-edge geoengineering concept. But you have to ask yourself, before the 20th century, what was gold to humans? It was soft, it was heavy, and it was nice to look at. It had no practical use for survival or technology.
So why? Why would this aesthetically pleasing, but otherwise useless metal be deemed the most valuable substance in the entire solar system by a hyper-advanced race?
Because, according to the narrative, it was the only thing that could save their planet.
Nibiru.
Nibiru, the 12th planet, or what modern astronomy calls Planet 9 or Planet X. Their world was dying from an environmental catastrophe that makes our current climate crisis look like, well, a minor inconvenience.
So what was happening there?
The Anunnaki leader, who's referred to by the title Anu, was facing a catastrophic situation. Their civilization was highly industrialized, and a massive series of volcanic eruptions had spewed incredible amounts of ash and toxic gases into their atmosphere.
This wasn't just pollution.
Oh no, this was an extinction-level event. It destroyed their planetary shield. Their technology, these skyscraper-sized air recyclers, they were completely overwhelmed. The ozone layer was thinning, perhaps even entirely gone in some places.
Which would expose the surface to deadly radiation.
Deadly levels of solar and cosmic radiation. The ancient texts describe Nibiru's atmosphere as sickly yellow, thick, and oppressive. The stars, once visible, had vanished behind this continuous haze. It was a slow, agonizing planetary death.
So Anu is desperate, watching his planet suffocate.
Right. And their scientists, they recognize that microscopic gold can reflect and absorb harmful radiation. So they theorize that if they could suspend enough of it in their upper atmosphere, essentially creating a shield of gold nanoparticles, they could stabilize Nibiru.
An ultimate geoengineering Hail Mary.
Exactly.
So they mobilized. They sent probes across the solar system, searching for a planet rich in gold, with liquid water, and this is crucial, a strong magnetic field to provide a natural shield while they did their work.
And those probes found Earth, or as they called it, Kai.
Kai.
Earth was the perfect candidate, mineral-rich, abundance of water, and its magnetic field offered excellent protection, and the timing was critical. Nibiru has this highly elliptical orbit, right? It takes about 3,600 Earth years to complete one revolution around the sun.
So it was due for a close pass-by.
Which made the journey viable for a large-scale expedition.
Before we get to the journey itself, let's talk about the physiology of these visitors. The source material is very clear. They weren't like us in size, right?
Not at all. The Anunnaki were giants, standing between 12 and 15 feet tall.
And there's a physical explanation for that.
There is. It's explained through physics. They evolved on Nibiru, which, being a larger planet or just having different rotational dynamics, exerted lower gravitational pull on its surface than Earth does.
And lower gravity lets things grow bigger.
Far bigger. Conversely, Earthlings, evolving under higher gravity, were naturally smaller, typically under 6 feet. They look similar to us, but massive, with larger eyes adapted to Nibiru's hazy light.
So Anu approves the mission. They load up the ships. But it wasn't just the Anunnaki nobility making this trip.
No, the total workforce was 900 individuals, 300 Anunnaki overseers, and 600 IG.
And the IG are critical to this story.
Absolutely. They were a previously conquered race. They were intelligent, highly capable, and the Anunnaki had subjugated them into total obedience. They were the primary slave labor, and they were also 12 to 15 feet tall.
They made the journey. They stopped briefly on Mars, which is an interesting detail, suggesting an early grasp of multi-world colonization before arriving in Earth's orbit. And they were reportedly just stunned by the vibrant blue and green of our planet compared to their dying world.
So they landed. They immediately settled in Mesopotamia, the land they designated as Eridu, the first colony city. Enki, the son of Anu, was put in charge of operations, and the work began immediately.
With the AG.
The AG were pressed into service, forced to build Eridu, the great city, in just 7 days. The sources reference this period before humans as one of immense suffering for the AG. They say the gods' load was great, the toil grievous, and the trouble excessive.
And this went on for a very, very long time.
150,000 years. An immense period. The IG extracted gold by the ton, shipping it back to Nibiru on continuous trips. But conditions back home just kept getting worse.
Which forced Enki and his brother Enlil, who was overseeing the mining, to demand more and more output.
Right. And this is where we see the first real acts of brutality on Earth. The slave masters, desperate for more gold, started using torture and advanced weaponry. The source specifically mentions particle beams to push the AG harder and faster.
But the IG were intelligent. They weren't just brutes.
They were intelligent, resourceful, and they could think abstractly. They understood the injustice of their situation, and they finally reached their breaking point.
The IG rebellion.
Yes. The descent just escalated. The source material details this swift, violent rebellion led by an IG named Atrahasis, which means exceedingly wise. They turned their mining tools into makeshift weapons and fought for freedom in the heart of Eridu.
And while the rebellion was eventually put down, it caused massive disruption. Lines collapsed.
They had proven themselves too intelligent and too proud to remain as docile labor.
So Enlil, who always saw the slaves as a nuisance, a threat to the operation, he demanded they all be executed for treason.
But Enki, the scientist in charge of the colony, he saw an opportunity for a compromise. One that would solve their labor crisis for good.
He argued against annihilation. They needed workers. But the IG were clearly too rebellious, too physically intimidating. So his revolutionary idea was to replace them.
Replace the massive, intelligent IG with a new slave race. One that was intelligent enough to handle the complex labor, but was engineered to be docile, submissive, and easier to control.
And the source material suggests Enki decided to use the native hominids living in the forests as the genetic raw material. Our ancestors, likely Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus.
The goal was clear. Take the robust physical traits of the hominid and infuse it with the advanced intelligence of the Anunnaki. But the process was fraught with peril, and the initial attempts failed disastrously.
And these failures, according to the narrative, are what left a lasting mark on Earth's mythology. Their first experiments, mixing Anunnaki DNA with a hominid male, resulted in, well, horrific monstrosities.
Yes, the source suggests these were the beasts that populate our earliest legends. The monstrous, chaotic, often cannibalistic beings like the Cyclops, Gorgons, Banshees, two-headed giants.
And these failed prototypes were just allowed to roam free, creating this environment of terror for the native hominids.
So they changed the methodology. Instead of combining male genetics, they focused on splicing Anunnaki DNA with a hominid female and implanting the resulting embryo.
And this is when they finally achieved success.
A male child was born resembling the Anunnaki but scaled down, built for Earth's gravity. They named him Adamu.
Which translates not just to first man, but literally from the ground or from Earth.
And this success story is echoed in virtually every single culture's creation myth across the globe.
That parallel is just profound. Whether you look at the Book of Genesis or ancient Babylonian texts, the story is consistent. Man is created in the God's image by mixing the God's essence,
their blood or a tear, which contains DNA,
with clay, which in ancient texts represents the raw material of life on Earth. It's a stunningly precise description of genetic engineering.
And this genetic intervention gives us the perfect, if radical, explanation for that evolutionary gap. We don't have to reconcile the impossible timeline of slow evolution. Instead, we have an explanation for the sudden appearance of a highly intelligent, purpose-built species ready for labor.
This theory, as radical as it is, gets surprisingly bolstered by modern scientific critique, specifically Dr. Ellis Silver's argument that humans are, frankly, just not suited for life on Earth. He lists several structural anomalies, starting with our inability to handle the sun.
This is a huge point. I mean, compared to virtually every other native species on this planet, we are uniquely ill-equipped. Our lack of fur leaves us highly susceptible to skin cancer and sunburn from UV radiation.
Most other animals have fur, scales, thick skin, or they use mud. They have natural protection.
Right. Humans spent millennia exposed and suffering. So you have to ask, why would an evolved species lack this basic natural defense?
And then there's our susceptibility to disease and birth disorders. Dr. Silver argues we're disproportionately affected compared to other species who seem to handle disease much more robustly.
And our internal chemistry seems deliberately maladjusted. We crave salt, sugar, fat, and carbohydrates, foods that actively shorten our lifespan and cause chronic illness, even when we're surrounded by natural, healthy produce.
If we evolved here, why are our innate cravings counter-survival?
It's as if we were engineered for short, intense bursts of labor, not for longevity.
And finally, the universal complaint, back pain. The argument is that our skeletal structure is not optimized for Earth's gravity, suggesting we evolved on a lower gravity planet.
It supports the idea of a Nibiru origin, where the builders were 12 to 15 feet tall. Our spines, designed for a different world, are constantly being compressed and damaged by Earth's pull.
It creates a powerful circumstantial case. We're an organism that's optimized for labor, possessing an impossible intelligence, but we're fundamentally ill-suited for the very planet we inhabit.
It strongly suggests a deliberate external construction.
So Adamu and Hava are successful. The population booms into the thousands. The Anunnaki teach them the basics of civilization, agriculture, governance, and, most importantly, the complex techniques required for gold mining.
They were even allowed access to the Anunnaki's sacred enclosure, the origin of the Garden of Eden myth. And for a time, the system worked perfectly. The first generation of humans were docile, submissive workers.
But that docility was disrupted when the Anunnaki, specifically Enki, broke their own laws. The human women were beautiful, and Enki engaged in forbidden relationships with the help.
And from this forbidden relationship, the genetic contamination truly began. A child was born, Adapa. This child, being part human and part Anunnaki, was fundamentally different from the first generation of engineered humans.
Adapa's line was highly intelligent and self-aware. They started to question authority, the endless toil. They inherited the Anunnaki's innate desire for power and, crucially, for gold.
But the most disruptive trait that was introduced was one the Anunnaki themselves carried and perhaps never anticipated passing on so virulently: violence.
So in a matter of a few short years, the submissive original humans were either killed off or just overwhelmed by these violent, ambitious new generations. Eridu became overrun. People fought and killed each other for resources, establishing a brutal hierarchy.
The Anunnaki's perfect slave race was rapidly spiraling into total chaos.
And Lil, observing this anarchy, was absolutely enraged. He saw humanity as a catastrophic failure, a dangerous nuisance. He tried to destroy them by sending a series of devastating plagues, droughts, pestilence, famine to thin the herd.
But Enki, who had grown fond of his creation, kept intervening. He kept easing their suffering and saving pockets of humanity.
So frustrated. And with the gold supply finally secured for Nibiru, the Anunnaki cast humanity out of the sacred enclosure, out of Eridu, and humans spread across the world. But the genetic mixing didn't stop.
The unions continued, and they resulted in a whole spectrum of hybrid offspring. The direct children of Anunnaki and humans were the powerful, celebrated demigods of myth. Figures like Gilgamesh, Samson, Hercules, Perseus.
But there was another, darker genetic line that emerged.
That line stemmed from unions between the first humans and the remnants of the IG slave race. These were the Nephilim, a race of cruel, massive giants who are described universally as brutal, tormenting, and often practicing cannibalism against the smaller Homo sapiens.
So this paints a really complex picture of the world before the Great Reset. While humans were building and expanding, they were constantly living in terror, preyed upon by these hybrid colossal monsters.
But all of this earthly drama was about to be dwarfed by a cosmic event. The Anunnaki knew their homeworld, Nibiru, was nearing the end of its 3,600-year orbit and was due for another close pass-by.
And, having secured their gold, they prepared to evacuate the planet, knowing that Nibiru's gravitational pull would cause an existential catastrophe on Earth. They simply did not want to be on the surface when it happened.
And the source material is remarkably detailed about the mechanics of this cataclysm. It suggests it was triggered by Nibiru passing between the Earth and the Moon at an immense speed, estimated at 40,000 miles per hour. This transit caused extreme tidal and tectonic forces.
What were the early warning signs? Because the source material suggests this is not instantaneous.
The first signs were subtle and terrifying. A deep hum below the threshold of human hearing that caused a generalized sickness. Animals grew frantic, horses screaming, great flocks of birds taking silent, terrified flight.
Then came the ground trembling.
Shaking and rolling violently, causing homes and early stone structures to just crumble instantly.
Then the source material describes the sky turning black, not from cloud cover, but from mountains of fire, flaming stones and meteorites, pieces of celestial debris dislodged by the gravitational pull, raining down as massive impact events, destroying farms and villages.
Following the fire and the rolling earth, the winds howled into a deafening roar, pelting everything with rain and debris, and then came a temporary calm. And that's when the true scale of the event became apparent.
The sea disappeared.
It rushed away at ferocious speed, leaving vast stretches of mud stretching to the horizon. And then came the ultimate event. The sea returning, but not as gentle waves.
No. The sources describe it as a gigantic tidal wave, a great white cloud, that was in fact a mountain of water whose crest pierced the clouds, taller than any existing mountain, higher than any bird could fly. This wall of water destroyed virtually all life on Earth.
And the Anunnaki watched from orbit, safe in their ships, and debated humanity's fate. Enlil, still viewing them as a destructive failure, argued for their complete destruction. They had served their purpose, they were now a nuisance.
But Enki, the creator, intervened.
He intervened on behalf of the creatures he had engineered and perhaps grown to love.
And this intervention resulted in the compromise that forms the basis of the global flood myth. A single righteous man named Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh was told in a dream to build a massive vessel, an ark, to save himself, his family, and the seeds of all living creatures.
And the universality of this flood story is arguably the single strongest cultural piece of evidence supporting a single cataclysmic event. Over 140 distinct cultures globally, Mayans, Nordics, Chinese, Polynesians, Native Americans who had absolutely no contact with the Mesopotamian or Hebrew cultures, tell strikingly similar independent stories of a global deluge.
And often saving exactly 8 people.
Often saving exactly 8 people, this strongly suggests a single, shared, horrific global experience.
And the detail that Utnapishtim's tale is preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written roughly 3,000 years before the biblical account of Noah, also strongly suggests that the biblical story is a cultural adaptation of this much older Sumerian narrative.
Exactly. So after the planet was wiped clean and the waters receded, the Anunnaki returned. And they were, according to the texts, impressed by humanity's resilience. They began helping the survivors, giving them the gift of civilization, reading, writing, advanced mathematics, and engineering.
This is the period when they might have helped build vast structures like the pyramids, which are found globally, and demonstrate an architectural knowledge that far exceeds the supposed technology of the time.
But they would not allow humanity to spiral out of control again. They implemented safeguards. They deliberately shortened the human lifespan, made us more susceptible to illness, and engineered the process of childbirth to be dangerously difficult for both mother and child.
All to ensure population growth remains slow and controlled.
And if we align this mythological timetable with geology, the Great Flood coincided precisely with the end of the Younger Dryas period, roughly 13,000 years ago. This was a period of rapid melting and global sea level rise.
So if the Anunnaki's timetable holds true, that Nibiru orbits every 3,600 years, the subsequent pass-by coincided with the rise of Sumerian civilization itself.
Which means, if you run the numbers forward, Nibiru's next transit is due around the year 2900 CE.
And this brings us to the crucial pivot of our deep dive. We have this compelling narrative, but we have to rigorously separate the myth from the modern interpretation, because the core of the modern Anunnaki theory rests largely on the work of one man, Zecharia Sitchin.
Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet, published in 1976, became the foundation for the entire Ancient Aliens genre. He claimed to have painstakingly studied the ancient cuneiform tablets, teaching himself Sumerian, and translating the narrative word for word.
And this is where we have to apply some serious skepticism.
Paramount skepticism. While Sitchin was a brilliant popularizer, he was not an academic. He wasn't a trained philologist, someone who studies ancient languages and texts, nor was he a Sumerologist or archaeologist. He reportedly held an economics degree and was self-taught in the ancient language.
And before the internet allowed academics worldwide to easily share and compare translations of these extremely rare and complex texts, Sitchin's interpretations were just taken at face value by a fascinated public.
But now, the academic consensus is clear. His translations were fundamentally flawed. They were designed to fit his planetary hypothesis.
So let's talk about some of those errors.
Okay, he fundamentally mistranslated core terms. For example, Sitchin translated Anunnaki as those who from the heavens came. The actual widely accepted academic translation is royal blood or royal seed.
So they were descendants of the god in him.
Exactly, the ruling deity. They represented the royal lineage within the Mesopotamian pantheon. They were gods, yes, but not necessarily space travelers based on that name alone.
And what about Nibiru?
He also took the Sumerian term Nibiru, which simply means crossing, and interpreted it as a massive planet crossing Earth's orbit every 3,600 years. Academic consensus is that Nibiru referred to a celestial marker, maybe Jupiter or Mars, or a point in the sky related to a solstice or a star path. It was a navigational marker, not an entire planet.
Sitchin created a planet and the orbit from that one word.
He did. And his famous interpretation of the cylinder seal, which he claimed proved the Sumerians knew all the planets in our solar system plus Nibiru, ignores the basic reality of ancient astronomy.
No telescope.
No telescopes. The Sumerians only had visible knowledge of the planets up to Saturn. They simply could not have known about Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto.
And the final, critical point. The Sumerian texts themselves, when you accurately translate them, contain no mention of the central motivation for the entire modern narrative.
Right. There is no description of gold mining to heal Nibiru's atmosphere. The gold was important, but that environmental crisis element was added later.
So, if the modern Anunnaki theory is built on flawed translations, why does the mystery persist? Why are there still scientific and archaeological anomalies that keep this core idea of external intervention alive?
We find the answers when we look outside of Sitchin's work, into cosmology and genetics. Let's start with the astronomical evidence that surfaced decades after his initial book. In 2015, Caltech researchers announced very strong evidence, a 98% certainty of a massive Neptune-sized planet deep within the solar system.
Planet 9.
This object, which they provisionally named Planet 9, fits the general description of Sitchin's Nibiru. Not necessarily the orbit he designated, but a massive, unknown planet in the outer solar system.
And its existence is inferred because its gravity is tangibly affecting the orbits of numerous objects in the Kuiper Belt, pulling them into this unexpected configuration.
So the possibility of a hidden, large elliptical orbit planet is now scientifically mainstream.
Then we have the physical evidence that suggests historical genetic anomalies. We can start in 1927 with the discovery of Queen Puabi's tomb in the ancient city of Ur, a city central to the Sumerian narrative.
Queen Puabi belonged to the first dynasty of Ur. If the hybrid timeline is correct, this places her directly in the period when Anunnaki human interbreeding would have been prevalent. Her skull, recovered by Leonard Woolley, was not only massive, but also dramatically elongated.
Fitting the physical description of the Anunnaki as genetically distinct from native humans.
Right. And here is the follow-up question. Why, nearly a century later, has there been significant resistance to attempts to perform modern DNA testing on her remains? If she was just a normal queen, the DNA would settle it quickly. The resistance itself adds a layer of suspicion.
And Queen Puabi is not an isolated incident. Thousands of years later, across the world in Peru, we find the famous Paracas skulls, similarly massive and elongated.
And these skulls, dating back thousands of years, were genetically tested in 2014, and they yielded an incredibly surprising result.
What was it?
The DNA analysis showed that the genetics of these ancient Peruvian inhabitants originated not in South America, but squarely in the Middle East, specifically Mesopotamia, thousands of miles and centuries away from where they were found.
A direct genetic link between ancient Sumer and ancient Peru.
Which strongly suggests a global migration of a specific genetically distinct population. So if we follow the ancient narrative, this would be the physical evidence of the Nephilim, the cruel, colossal giants born of the age human unions, or perhaps direct Anunnaki hybrids who were cast out of Eridu and subsequently spread across the globe.
The physical evidence of large, elongated skulls with Middle Eastern DNA found thousands of miles away certainly lends credence to the idea of global hybrid travel and colonization.
But the most compelling evidence for targeted manipulation, the true turbo switch that turned us into modern humans, comes not from astronomy or archaeology, it comes from modern biology.
We've always operated under the assumption that our superior brain size gave us the edge over our evolutionary cousins, the Neanderthals. But a closer look reveals that Neanderthals possessed the same size brain as Homo sapiens.
And they were stronger, they were capable of complex art, organized war, familial structures. By all metrics, they should have been the dominant species. Yet Homo sapiens conquered the world and Neanderthals went extinct. Why?
It wasn't simple crossbreeding, and it wasn't slow, random mutation. A seminal 2020 study by the Max Planck Institute identified a genetic mutation that radically accelerated the creation of neurons in the Homo sapiens brain.
And that provided the massive cognitive leap necessary for rapid civilization building.
That gene is called TKTL1. How did it differ between humans and Neanderthals?
Both species possess the TKTL1 gene, which is responsible for brain development. But the human version differs from the Neanderthal version by only one amino acid.
One single amino acid.
This single, highly specific difference is what acts as the switch. It allowed for exponentially faster and more efficient neuron generation in the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for higher-level functions like language, abstract thought, and complex planning.
That is the ultimate anomaly. That kind of highly targeted alteration changing a single amino acid in a vital complex gene is extremely unlikely to occur through slow random mutation. It strongly suggests the use of highly sophisticated, precise technology
Genetic engineering.
to create a specific, highly intelligent outcome. It provided Homo sapiens with the intellectual engine that drove our sudden explosion of technology and ultimately wiped out our competition.
The slow, meandering evolutionary progress of the first 250,000 years of human existence, followed by the sudden, overwhelming intellectual dominance and technological acceleration, it all points to a deliberate external action. The physical evidence for the switch flip is found in our very DNA. The question of who remains open, but the evidence for the event seems undeniable.
So let's synthesize this intricate narrative we've explored today. We have a single, incredibly complex narrative that ties together humanity's impossible evolutionary speed, our genetically distinct structure, a massive global catastrophe, the Flood, coinciding perfectly with the end of the Younger Dryas period.
And a planetary cosmology that may be corroborated by modern science's search for Planet 9. Even if we discard Zecharia Sitchin's faulty translations about the gold mining and Nibiru's orbit, the core mystery persists.
An anomalous acceleration of human intelligence, the prevalence of global flood myths suggesting a cataclysmic impact, and the physical evidence of genetically distinct hybrid populations found across continents.
The ancient texts offer a complete, comprehensive, and cohesive answer to these profound questions of human origin.
And the clock, according to that original narrative, is ticking. If Nibiru's orbit is indeed around 3,600 years, and the last close pass coincided with the rise of Sumer, Nibiru's next return is projected for around the year 2900 CE.
Right.
What does that impending date mean for us, the children of the Anunnaki?
It means we must be prepared, or perhaps we're already executing the escape plan. The source material suggests a kind of philosophical closing thought about this cosmic cycle. By the time 2900 CE rolls around, humanity will likely have achieved precisely what the Anunnaki did millennia ago.
We will be a multi-world, spacefaring species.
Establishing outposts on the Moon, Mars, Europa, and mining asteroids for resources.
So if Nibiru returns around that time and causes another cataclysm that wipes Earth clean, reducing the planet to ruin, and we, the genetically engineered, resilient survivors, descend from the stars in our advanced spacecraft to find a freshly washed planet teeming with new life, or the few hardy remnants of the old.
Will we become the new sky gods for that freshly wiped planet? Will we, in fact, fulfill the ancient cycle, becoming the engineers and creators, returning to reclaim our mining colony, only to repeat the violent, world-shaping patterns set by our own terrifying creators?
The masters became the slaves, and the slaves became the future masters. It forces you to question not just where we came from, but whether history is less of a line and more of an endless catastrophic loop.